Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Wherever you are in the world, I want to wish you a strong, strong welcome to 5 effective ways to personalize web experiences, our webinar today. I'm Tom Murphy. I'm the GM and Editorial Director of Simpler Media Group in CMSWire. I'll be your moderator today. Our agenda is like this: 5 minutes for introductions, about 35 minutes with the great Noah Logan, and about 15 to 20 minutes featuring you in our live question and answer period. Before we go any further, I want to reiterate that we are having an important contest today. 2 of our attendees today will be given a free VIP pass to the Digital Customer Experience Strategies Summit. That's September 24th and 25th in New York City. And the web address for that is www.digitalcustomerexp.com. digitalcustomerexp.com. Folks, this is a valuable item. These are VIP passes valued at $2,195 each. We'll be announcing our lucky winners at the end of today's program. You must be present to win, by the way. So please don't leave early. Okay, we have a few housekeeping notes to take care of before we get to the main part of the program. We are taking questions via WebEx. I'll explain that in a second. We're also taking questions via Twitter at CMSWire. The web chat window over on your right side in the middle of the right column allows you to communicate with our panelists or each other, and we encourage you to use that if you want to pose a question. Another way you can do that is use the official Q&A answer window, which is just down below that in the Q&A tab, and you just hit that down arrow, it'll pop right up for you. We'll be having polling questions during this. We want to get your opinion on what we're talking about today. The polling questions will appear themselves in the main slide area. However, to answer the polling questions, you will need to go to a pop-up window on the lower right. You can't see it now. It'll only come up when the polls are there. And you will click one of those radio buttons and then hit the submit button on the lower right portion. I'll remind you about that as it comes up. CMSWire, which is presenting today's program, was founded about 11 years ago. We have more than 300 editorial contributors, including a lot of folks like you, practitioners, everyday practitioners who write stories for us. And we welcome your submissions. Please write to submissions at cmswire.com if you're interested in doing that. We publish more than 200 articles a month. We have monthly editorial themes. We have tweet jams, hangouts, webinars. It's a fun place, folks. We have 3 primary topic areas. Of course, we list 5 of them here. Customer experience, digital marketing, social business, enterprise collaboration, and enterprise information management. I'm sure you can see that those are really 3. Now it's time to do some more introductions. Today's program is sponsored by Clickability. That's Upland Software's software as a service web content management platform. It enables marketers and online publishers to efficiently create, manage, and publish content globally on any device, track and personalize visitor experiences, and implement web-based branding, social media, demand generation campaigns. To learn more, please go visit our sponsors at clickability.com. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Noah Logan. He is Senior Vice President with Upland Software and General Manager for Clickability. He has over 15 years' experience in technology, and he's been instrumental in expanding Clickability's leadership position in web content management. With Noah's help, Clickability is responsible for the management and global deployment of over 500 websites worldwide. How'd you like to have that responsibility? For such companies as NBC and Cantor Fitzgerald. Noah, it's my pleasure to turn the microphone over to you at this point. Please take it away, sir.
Thank you, Tom. And thanks to everyone who's joining us today. We certainly know how valuable your time is, and our goal is to have you leave this session with some new information and some new ideas about personalizing web experiences to help you drive your own organizations forward. We're going to cover practical, tactical, and strategic aspects of personalization, and we've got some myths to debunk along the way. We've got some great steps to help you get started if you're just beginning the journey. And along the way, we're going to share some things that we've learned from working with our customers who are using our software to transform the way that they work with content and experiences. So let's start this journey by looking into why personalization is important. Today, things have changed fundamentally. So over the last 10 years, especially the last 5 years, a buyer's journey has fundamentally changed. More than 70% of the buyer's journey is already complete before they ever let you know that they're actually shopping. Personally, for me, this became clear around about 2009 when I answered a random phone call one afternoon. It was a prospective buyer of our software, and they were reaching out to us to get some information. And it turned out that they were very far along in the process. Before they had ever even picked up the phone to call me or to call us, they had done a tremendous amount of research. So they had actually downloaded case studies from our website. They knew a tremendous amount about our technical architecture, and they had actually contacted 2 of the people that were listed in our case studies, reached out to them and already had conversations with them. So they knew a tremendous amount about us and about what they were shopping for. Now, we were lucky in this context because the person who reached out to us, it was a consultant working for a technology manufacturing company called Sienna. We were lucky because he had gotten the right content along the way already. But for every one of him, there are often 2 or 3 others out there who are a fit for what you may be offering, but don't find what they're actually seeking. So what's actually driving this change in behavior is interesting. Our expectations as consumers and as business-to-business buyers of technology have been shaped by our web experiences with brands like Amazon and Netflix. We now expect relevant and proactive recommendations. And until recently, technological and cost barriers prevented these kinds of capabilities from being utilized for most marketers. But those barriers are being torn down today, and we're beginning to see marketers leapfrogging their competition by delivering a much more personalized experience. How pervasive is this personalization among B2B marketers? Well, the data and recent surveys show us that a minority of organizations have adopted true multi-channel personalization today, less than 30%. But many are planning to do so in the near term. So for the first movers, there's an advantage to gain. And this is actually a great time for us to ask you for some feedback. So we have a polling question for you that's coming up here in just a moment. And Tom, can you light up our poll?
My pleasure. We're going to be, there's that polling window opening up on the right side of your screen now. The question is, do you plan to develop a website personalization strategy? Obviously, the answer is yes. Already have one in place? Yes. But it is not our top priority due to other competing needs. And C, no, we're not ready for this yet. So please pick one of the answers on the lower right portion of your screen. Click that Submit button, and we will start tabulating the results. And while we do, I'll just ask Noah, my guess is that most people will say they do plan to develop a website personalization strategy, but I guess a lot of people are still having a problem with that. Is that your feeling?
Well, I think there's a wide spectrum of maturity among the kinds of folks that we talk to, and some are very far along and others not so far along. Our hope is that the audience today is engaged in the planning for personalization and the developing strategies to execute on that. And that's why we might be having these conversations today. But we'll hopefully have a small data set here from our poll results.
Yeah, here's our data set as you speak. It came up magically as you said data set. The answer is B, yes, but it is not our top priority due to other competing needs. That had 48% of the vote, almost half our audience is feeling that way. About 28% didn't vote, and the rest of it's pretty much split between they have one in place or they're not ready for it yet. So, interesting results. Noah, I'm going to turn the program back over to you to go on with your slides, sir.
Thanks, Tom. And this is great. We have some data now, albeit it's a small data sample. And again, we have some great content coming up to talk about ways to get started, especially if it is not your top priority. But first, I want to come back to a little bit of a bigger data set where we see some additional evidence. We can actually begin to quantify with some of the data that's publicly available now how much personalization can impact engagement. And for many of you, these are data points that you might use in developing a business case to help make personalization a greater priority in your organization. So these data points, HubSpot, Forrester noting these, I want to share one other with you. This is a customer of ours called Interface. They're a global flooring manufacturing organization. And we've been working with them for about a year and a half. And when they launched their new website on our platform, they undertook a number of very basic kinds of personalization steps. And as a result of that, they saw a pretty significant increase in a number of their key KPIs, including in their context, the number of products being uptaken or added to their cart per order. And that came through offering some tools for the visitor to work with their content in a way that was very specific to that individual visitor. But let's take a look at a couple of other attributes of what personalization done well looks like. Now, you can deliver a custom experience based upon many inputs, and you can surface personalization in a variety of different ways. These include looking at demographics and psychographics, behavior on the site in the current session and past sessions, the role of the visitor or persona of the visitor, the industry that they may come from, if you're in a B2B context, or the region that they're coming from, as well as things like device type. And using these different inputs, you can do things like serve up real-time recommendations, meaning other content that may be relevant to them that might move them along in a buying process or an engagement process with you. You might give them ratings on the content or the products that they may be looking at. And if you're farther along in your personalization strategies, you may serve up things like their account history or the products that they have already bought from you and other things that they may be interested in based upon that account history. So we recommend, given this broad spectrum of inputs and ways that you may be able to personalize, we recommend taking a walk before you run approach and starting small to get comfortable and then doing more as you prove ROI. We see that many organizations believe that personalization requires a lot of time, and so it doesn't bubble up on the priority list. As we saw from the polling data here, even with our small data set, almost 50% of you are in a place where it isn't a priority at this stage. So the kinds of myths that organizations believe are that personalization requires a lot of time, a lot of investment, a lot of resources, and very expensive tools to undertake. Now, this doesn't have to be the case, and as you're building business cases, it can be carefully rebutted. Still, despite the growing number of you that are planning to take advantage of personalization, these myths are persisting. So let's take a moment to talk about these in just a little bit more detail. Our first myth is that I don't have enough content. Now, this doesn't have to hold you back. And by choosing some simple use cases to create variations on the content that you already have, you can really blow up this myth. For example, we have a customer that shows different hero images on their homepage. They're a business-to-business marketer, and they show different hero images and text on the homepage to visitors that are coming from different industry segments. So for instance, a healthcare visitor sees a appropriate image and appropriate text, whereas a manufacturing industry visitor sees a different image and different text. And they do this by inferring the company name and mapping that to their CRM information with the IP address of the visitor. Not terribly hard to do these days with the kinds of tools that are available. And this kind of account-based marketing can be achieved by very simple variations, like we talked about, in the content that you've already invested in creating. So you don't necessarily need a whole lot of new content in order to get started. Our second myth is a real biggie. Many organizations believe that they need to redesign, fundamentally re-architect their website in order to take advantage of personalization. And a small step like the hero image that we just described certainly wouldn't require a full redesign. It can be done and executed in the context of what you've already got simply by adding some more content and variations on the content that you already have. So 2 or 3 steps down the road where you've proven the ROI and you want to do more, you might undertake a redesign. But to get started, you certainly don't need to. In fact, many of our customers who are implementing our solution concurrent with a redesign will let the redesign itself bake in with basic personalization before taking more advanced personalization steps. Our third myth is another very common one. It's based on the misconception that personalization must be complex in order to create value. Again, choosing basic use cases to start will reduce complexity, and with the right kinds of tools in place, you can experiment and iterate. And this is important because this more agile approach allows you to phase things in and to learn as you go. Now, our fourth myth is sometimes personalized web experience, but they need not be expensive. For instance, our SaaS approach is generally 1/3 to 1/2 the cost of commercial on-premise or hosted software. And you may be able to extend some of the tools that you already use today simply by adding modules or integrating lightweight third-party software or services. But if you are considering new tools or fundamentally overhauling things, make sure you're thinking about the data integration so that you can get the most out of your investment in other technologies besides the website, things like your CRM system and your marketing automation investments that you may have already made. Our fifth myth is perhaps the biggest one of all. And again, if you're starting small with manageable use cases and good tools, you can actually get more done with the team that you have today. Sienna, that customer that I talked about a little bit earlier who cold called me back in 2009, they were actually able to triple the number of marketing projects they delivered per quarter with the same size team by moving on to our solution. So sometimes removing bottlenecks can truly transform the way you work with content and experiences. Now we've got a second poll question here for you, and I'm curious how you feel about the kinds of things that are holding your organization back from making personalization a priority. So let's take a quick poll. Tom, over to you.
Thanks, Noah. And it is a good question. What is the biggest obstacle holding your organization back from personalization? You need more content to map personas? The website is not flexible enough to easily segment and offer personalization? Strategy is not in place? You need more technology applications to make it possible, or you just don't have enough time and resources to execute. I would imagine there's a few people who would pick multiple answers, but please choose the answer that best suits your response in the window on the lower right corner of the screen. And then don't forget to click the Submit button as you do that. It's just a two-step process, and then we'll submit those results. Noah, I think we're going to see an array over that whole field, and I think you laid it out well in the last 5 slides.
Thanks, Tom. I think that from our customer experiences, we see a variety of different spots that may be bottlenecks in executing on these kinds of engagement strategies. And they're usually a combination of people, process, and technology. And very often, there are very small steps that you can take in each area to, again, remove those bottlenecks, whether it's small adjustments to technology or elevating the project in terms of its responsibility in the organization, and making sure that different parts of the organization are actually aligned in their consensus around strategy for these kinds of things. So we very often see a combination of these kinds of things that, again, very small steps can move the needle quite a bit.
Well, we are seeing an array of answers here, and I think you're absolutely right about that. The leading answer is strategy is not in place, which is kind of the umbrella answer, I think. 27% of our sample said that. The next most is the website is not flexible enough. I think a lot of people have that fear. 10% said they don't have enough time, and then 5% each said they need more technology or they need more content. All good answers all good mythical answers, as you laid out before. And now I'm going to turn the program back over to you so you can explain to folks how easy this is. Thank you, Noah.
Thanks, Tom. And thank you for everyone who's answering the polling questions. This is great feedback. So let's take a look at some of the steps that you might take to actually get started. Our work with our customers has consistently revealed 5 key areas to focus on when embarking on personalization efforts. These are knowing your personas, so who your audience is and why are you creating content for them specifically. It's to start listening and actually gather data from the existing tools that you have and to do some analysis on that data. And also things like subjective surveys help in terms of understanding the audience and what their expectations are. It's knowing your content and what you have and how that maps to the different personas or different segments which you may be trying to reach. It's actually segmenting your audience, so defining the facets of your audience that you value as far as the different kinds of experiences that you might want to create. And then it's fundamentally deciding what to personalize. So actually making some use case driven decisions to help you get started. So we've touched on each of these a bit already, but let's explore them further. The first place is really to focus on knowing your audience. Personas are a simple but very often misunderstood tool for doing so. They help you identify who you're creating content for, what information they're looking for throughout their own buying process. They help you profile and identify what motivates that specific persona, and helps you understand what deters them from buying as well. It includes some very objective criteria like their titles, responsibilities, roles, how influential they might be in making a purchase, what their budget authority is, for instance. And fundamentally, it looks at, those personas look at what's going to make them make a decision or suddenly abandon the decision. So personas can be a simple place to start, and they can become much richer over time, especially as you have more data. Now, you can use various approaches to continue building your personas. You can gate content. You can progressively profile your audience with those gates. And you can capture data from things like A/B testing. Those are good next steps once you've started on the process of actually defining personas. And again, taking a walk before you run kind of approach allows you to get started and then do more as you mature. Now, gating content and progressively profiling means collecting a lot of data. And gathering data as a process really starts, the basic starting point for that is listening to your audience. Now, for some of our customers in more traditional fields like manufacturing, the big surprise for them, and again, this may not be a surprise for all of you, but for them, it's been the massive increase over the last couple of years in the percentage of their visitors who are using mobile devices to interact with their sites. For instance, a lot of the people in those positions 2 years ago would not have thought that someone would be using a phone to browse content on a heavy equipment manufacturing website, for instance. But the data has actually shown that a lot of people are. So you have to listen to the data, and it's important to know not just who your visitors are, but where they came from, and that includes their location and the device that they may be working with. That data helps you determine where you want to invest further. And as your listening advances, you can implement broader personalization strategies. For instance, you may begin to ask very different questions of different audience segments as you gate content, or create entirely different experiences targeted to certain audience segments. One of our customers is the world's largest distributor of press releases, an organization called CMSWire. Many of you may know them or even be clients of theirs. And in their listening and their data, they saw that a very specific segment of their audience was using their sites to actually research stocks. So they created a very specific targeted experience, a logged in, to take advantage of tools that PR Newswire could make available to them for tracking public companies mentioned in the press releases on their site. So they took their personalization efforts another layer deep based upon that data that they were seeing in segmenting their audience. So in addition to listening to your data, it's important to get to know your content. We talked about this a little bit before, but a great way to get to know your content is a content audit. And it can be a very powerful exercise to help you set the stage for personalization, and a very inexpensive step to take. When we relaunched the Clickability brand earlier this year as a part of Upland Software, we conducted our own content audit. And part of that process was mapping our existing content to the buying stage for each of our audience personas. In addition to showing us where the gaps were in the content that we had, this gave us an opportunity to very efficiently tag all of our content for the personas and segments that we were focusing on. Later on, this enabled us to use those tags to drive the proactive content recommendations and ensure that the right personas are seeing the best content for them at their stage in the buying journey. Another facet of our content audit involved looking at what content could be easily adapted or presented for different audience segments. Segmenting your audience is another great step to take for personalization. And you can define any number of audience segments. You could have hundreds, for instance. But again, if you're just getting started on the personalization journey, you want to choose simple over complex, fewer segments over more. For instance, you might choose to segment based upon a customer versus a non-customer, or on a small number of industries that are your key buyers. and then expand those segments over time. The important thing is to identify the most meaningful segments for your business and your organization so that you can get started. Now, the last of our 5 key steps to beginning to personalize is choosing what use cases you want to start with. Your organization may have a very different set of goals than Interface does as a flooring manufacturer, or PR Newswire does as a press release distribution vehicle. So the best places for you to begin will be different. But as I said before, when you're starting, choose simple use cases and then iterate. And as you begin to experiment, plan to measure as much as you can. Your website has evolved over time, and your approach to personalization will too. It's important to recognize that. But focusing on your key metrics will be critical to that evolution. Here are a few of the key metrics that our customers use to track engagement as they measure the impact of their personalization strategy. These are things like the average time spent on a site, the abandonment rate on certain key pages, offer engagement and form fills, how many content gates did you serve up, how many of those were actually fulfilled, what kind of social sharing is happening of your content, and how much more informed your buyers may be during the sales conversations that you're having with organizations that may be buying from you. And then the last key KPI, obviously, is the revenue. How is the personalization experiments that you're taking on impacting that key KPI? That brings us to the end of our slides. So we'd like to open it up for a few questions here. Tom, over to you.
Thank you very much, Noah. I really appreciate that presentation, and I know our many, many listeners today also appreciated it. Very good points, very well explained. I'm surprised to see we don't have more questions than we do right now, but we do have several to get started with, and we will ask them. In the meantime, I want to remind all our listeners that if you go to the Q&A tab on the lower right bar, you can have a chance here to ask Noah a direct question about his presentation today, and we'll put it on the list. Let's start with this one, Noah. You mentioned the personal experience that Interface and PR Newswire have created. Can you describe a bit more how they have achieved that, and what integration was needed with other systems in those cases?
Thanks, Tom. That's a great question. So Interface and PR Newswire are actually very different in terms of the intent of their experiences. And so they've taken very different approaches. Interface actually manages all of their content in the Clickability web content management platform. And they've integrated that content that they're managing with via a REST API with IBM WebSphere, where they're rendering the experience, managing the identity, and tracking the behavior of the visitor. So because they're doing some commercial transactions, they're actually consuming content from the content management system and feeding that into their e-commerce system. They've written a bunch of algorithms that they use to actually track the visitor's behavior and then segment the visitor into different industries and different kind of buying categories. And then all of their content is tagged according to those industries and buying categories. And they'll use that information to proactively recommend to the visitor other content or other designs of flooring that they may be interested in during the course of their session on the website. Now, PR Newswire, on the other hand, manages their entire content and experience with Clickability. And their integration point is that they have a single sign-on system for managing identity and registering visitors and storing all of that visitor registration information. And so they integrate between the Clickability solution for delivering their content and the experience and their identity management system so that those two are talking to one another, and that once a visitor has logged in, if you will, that identity can be used to personalize the experience. So for instance, Tom, if you are tracking General Electric as a stock and IBM, that's part of what's tagged to your identity, and so you'll see all of the press releases for those particular organizations and other related organizations. So two different approaches for different kinds of use cases between Interface and PR Newswire.
Very interesting. We have a question from Fred. Personalization has been around for a long time. In some cases, it's gotten a bad name because it's too complex or hard to predict what works. Some people think it's better just to implement A/B or multivariate testing. What's your response to the personalization naysayers? Good question. I like that one.
Well, again, I think it depends upon the goals of your particular organization. As a blanket statement, I think they're two very different things, and they're focused on two very different goals. And for some organizations, just simple variations on content on a landing page, for instance, that you're using to try and capture leads may be a lot more impactful and a better place to start. So you might start with A/B testing there. But once you do that, taking the next step and saying, I've got a single landing page. Do I want to create 100 different landing pages for different industries and test all of those variations? Or do I want to use some dynamic personalization to understand the industry of the visitor and show them a bit of text that's specialized for their industry? That's where you start to get into the value of personalization. And the data, for instance, that we showed a little bit earlier from the HubSpot study, where they were studying more % increase in the form fills or engagement on calls to action that were actually personalized. So you may get a little tick from doing an A/B testing, but a 44% improvement in form fills is something that is very hard to deny. So I think the approach depends upon, again, your specific use case. There's not a blanket statement to it, and there's value to both kinds of approaches.
Good answer. Let's see. Let's ask this one from Bradley Wagner. The need of personalization against the risk of incorrectly identifying or segmenting a visitor and alienating them by showing them incorrect content, or how do you protect against that kind of risk?
Well, I think that's a great question, and certainly a concern as you get into executing personalization strategies, and it will become something that is more important to consider as your use cases become more complex. I think the approach to mitigate your signal to noise filter is pretty high, and by that I mean if you're doing something like account-based personalization, you might use an augmentation of your data through a vendor like Demandbase, for instance, that allows fine-tune IP address resolution to account or industry and improve the data quality, if that's a big concern. So there are ways to improve the data that you're using for personalization. That's one approach. And then the second is just to take, make sure you're setting a high enough threshold on the specificity of your personalization that you reduce those kinds of risks.
Good. This is a little bit more of an advanced question, I think is probably on the mind of a lot of our listeners. We're having a hard time creating a cohesive experience across several websites. What are some tips you can share from your customers' learnings?
Well, first, you're not alone. This is actually a very common challenge. And our customers' experience, we know it's generally not a technology challenge. It's more often a people and process challenge. Our best tip here is to really bring the stakeholders for each of those disparate websites that you might be trying to create the cohesive experience across together, and start by building a common understanding of what the desired experience is. And from there, developing a shared roadmap that each website can actually execute on. And if you've done that and you're still being held back by the systems, you may wish to consider a consolidation to one system for all of those websites, or a wholesale change to a more flexible multi-site platform.
Let me ask a related question to that. What's the highest impact place to start personalizing? That may or may not be related, actually, but where would you start this personalization?
That's very hard to generalize the answer for. The truth is that it may be very different to another, and even within a organization, from one website to another. So in my experience, the best way to start is by sort of opening your listening ears and starting to identify the most impactful use cases for your specific website or your specific experience that you're trying to deliver, and then go upwards from there into broader, across websites or across an organization, so that you're aligning with the broader organizational goals. Great.
Here's a question that just came in that I like a lot, from Daniel Venantelli. I think I'm saying that right, Daniel. I hope I am. All of this is fairly direct for e-commerce companies, even for nonprofits with fundraising. But what about local government agencies or government agencies in general? Are there any recommendations to approach questions that we should be asking?
That's a great question, and the unfortunate truth is that local government, like financial services, have different regulatory kinds of constraints or self-regulatory constraints. So the kinds of things that you want to engage or use to engage your audience, you want to make sure you're complying with. And so, one of the questions to ask is, what are the specific goals of the experiences that you're trying to deliver, and how much information can you reasonably gather? That's an important one. The second thing that comes to mind there is, looking beyond the nonprofit model or the e-commerce kinds of models. What are the expectations of your audience? Again, are there certain things that they're doing, like trying to renew a permit, or trying to register something, where if they have already identified themselves to you in the past, you can use information to help them do that more effectively and more quickly? Looking at how their expectations of the experience have changed, and what you might be able to do to meet those, is another good place to start listening or asking the question.
Interesting. Folks, we have about 14 minutes left in the program. We still have time for you to ask questions. If you'd like to, go to the Q&A window and enter your question, and we'll try to get to it. We still have several good ones here, though, and I'm going to go next to a question from Pavan Arora. Are there other ROI stats on conversion from personalization similar to the HubSpot case? And if so, what determines high versus low ROI? Software, strategy, or execution?
Great question, Pavan. So I think to answer the second part first, I think the biggest determinant of a high versus low ROI, pardon me, comes from good planning and good strategy, as opposed to execution. you can execute well on a bad strategy and still have a very low ROI. So the biggest benefit there, I think, comes from, again, choosing the use cases efficiently and intelligently that you think will drive, based upon data, the biggest return for your specific case. In terms of the data, there's actually a variety of data out there besides the HubSpot data point that we have in the presentation. Good places to look for additional data on ROI for personalization efforts are places like eConsultancy, Marketing Sherpa, and even CMSWire. You'll find some data if you do some digging there. And it is out there. It absolutely is out there. You'll see more of it for commerce kinds of use cases, but we're starting to see an increasing number of data points for B2B or more commercial use cases as well.
Good. Well, here's a good general question from Dave Sawyer. What's one of the biggest mistakes you see companies making relative to personalization? I know you must see a few of them, but what's one of the biggest?
I think one of the biggest mistakes is focusing entirely on a identified visitor, meaning requiring someone to register and give you a whole bunch of information so that you create a logged-in experience. I think that's the biggest failure and probably the biggest sort of misconception that I've seen perpetuated over time. And I'll give you just a quick background on part of that perspective. We've worked with a lot of media organizations over time, and they were very early adopters of personalization technologies. They were trying to drive much greater engagement with their audience, folks coming back. And we did this work with folks like CNN, Wall Street Journal, Time Magazine. And the early personalization approaches that they took were to create these, really kind of rich portals that once you identified yourself, you could get personalized news feeds and all kinds of content that was specifically relevant to your interests. But what they saw was that the uptake or the adoption on those kinds of things was so small that it almost never showed an ROI. So that kind of approach to and thinking about personalization as this my account or my logged-in experience for your audience is not actually the best place to start, in my opinion. It's to start with your anonymous visitors, meaning the people who have not already identified themselves, who you don't have a deep profile on, and to use some basic information about their behavior and about their their devices and their industry or audience segments to actually start to deliver them content that may be more relevant to them, so that you kind of move them along in terms of the value of the personalized experience that they're getting. And ultimately, they'll be a lot more engaged with you, and they'll be a lot more likely to take up things like registration or giving you more information about themselves. So that's my viewpoint on that kind of failure of personalization efforts in the past.
Great. Diane Klitsch has a very specific question for you. You mentioned extensions to a CMS that would help deliver personalization. Can you list a few of those?
Sure.
More relevant to the CMS that she's using, should she consult her vendor?
Well, I think there are different categories of extensions, if you will, and I'll just give you a couple. There are they're not necessarily extensions to a CMS per se. They may be third-party providers that allow you to get information that the CMS might use to better personalize the experience. And these are things like, if you look at identity tools like Gigya or Jan Rain, are things that are becoming more common for audience registration and identification, and can provide APIs that deliver information, in real time back to CMS, that in turn can use that information to personalize the experience. That's one category of extension. Another is what you might think of as data augmentation, and these are services like Demandbase, and Demandbase is a company that has a real-time API and database that allows you to use the IP address of the visitor to get very high quality resolution of that visitor, what company they may be a part of, even if they're coming through a larger network, for instance, in terms of their IP address. Or if you're have a visitor that's filling out a form on a website, you can use those kinds of services to complete form fills based upon other standard information, so that you reduce the amount of time a visitor takes to complete a form. And those kinds of data sources like Jan Rain or Gigya have generally hooks that you can use to plug into the content management system as inputs. And if you have a good content management system, it will allow you to use those inputs to deliver a experience or a next page or a component of a page for the visitor that is personalized based upon that input. And the last category, as far as extensions or integrations that I think is highly relevant, is integration with other data sources like marketing automation or CRM. So if you have a strong content management system, you will be able to take real-time or asynchronous data from something like Marketo, for instance, a lead score from Marketo or an activity score from Marketo, and use that information in conjunction with the visitor on the site to say, okay, we know this visitor, we have information about them in Marketo, and their activity score is 200, and so we're going to show them a special promotion targeted to their industry segment on the next page that we render, because we're getting that information from Marketo. So those are a couple of things that come to mind when you mention extensions from the website. If that didn't hit the answer to your question, please let us know.
Yeah, where can they reach you, Noah? Get in touch.
I think we had a slide in here that had my contact information, but if we don't, you can reach out to me directly. My email address is my first initial and my last name. That's nlogan, Logan, at uplandsoftware.com. And you can also, if that's too much to write down, just go to the clickability.com website and click on the link that says Contact Us. And there's a phone number and a form you can fill out there, so don't hesitate to pick up the phone or to complete that. We'd love to hear from you.
Okay, we have just a couple of minutes remaining. I'm going to ask one more quick question. If you could just keep your answer fairly short here. I think it's a pretty broad question. And then I have the honor and duty to announce our winners for today's program. So don't go away, anyone. We're staying with us today. Mark Miller and Jeff Allen have both asked about analytics tools. Mark asked the most common tool, and Jeff said, how do you know who your customer is? Is it through analytics, and how? And do you mean using a pay service or just the normal GA tools that give gender and age info? So can you give some direction there quickly on analytics?
Yeah, Analytics is a very broad term, obviously, and as far as vendors, you've got things like Google Analytics and Adobe that are sort of the gold standards, if you will, for website analytics. And then you've got other analytics sources like Marketo or Eloqua if you're doing marketing automation that give you a lot more color on who your industry segments might be and what the activity is there. When I talk about listening, I'm talking specifically about whatever data analytics sources you might have that you're collecting aggregate information from the audience, as well as data that might come from the forms that you have on your website that you're collecting information from, as well as more direct information like website surveys that you might run. And they're, again, very lightweight, very inexpensive tools for doing those kinds of survey things. All of those things together help you get a profile of who your audience is and can help you inform the personas that you might be building.
Terrific. Well, the big moment has arrived. I know a lot of our attendees today were excited about the 2 free VIP passes to the Digital Customer Experience Strategy Summit. That's coming up on September 24th and 25th in the Big Apple, exp.com, digitalcustomerexp.com. Please check it out. Now, again, these passes are valued at $2,195 each. We're giving away 2 today, and I'm very happy to announce our 2 confirmed attendees today are, drumroll, Allison Harrison, the Digital Marketing Coordinator for the State of Michigan Lottery Department, and Kevin Miller, who asked a question from us, VP of Experience Development at Keeping Current Matters. Congratulations to both of you. Please confirm that you can attend that conference. If not, we will send one of the passes to one of our backup winners. We have 4 of them identified. You can use our function on the chat to notify our host that you're present today or that you cannot attend and you'd like to pass it along. But Allison, Kevin, congratulations. Thanks for being with us today, and thanks to our entire audience. I'd like to remind you that this webinar has been recorded. It will be available on CMSWire in the next few days. We're also going to do a story about this webinar and put it up on CMSWire. So come on, read that and a few of our other stories on CMSWire. I think you'll like what you see there. Thanks again to Noah Logan. Noah, you just given a really clear-headed, very informed presentation about this, and I want to thank Upland and Clickability for sponsoring today's event. I want to thank our producers in the background for helping to put together this event, and more than anybody else, I'd like to thank our audience for being with us today. It's not an event without you. You really make the event, and thanks for so many good questions today. Stay tuned for upcoming webinars from CMSWire. We have them regularly, and we love to have you back for more of them. My name is Tom Murphy, and I'll be signing off now. Thank you for being with us today.